everybody. Today we have Steve Henn, a local poet. His most recent title is Indiana Sadman of the Year. We have 3 of his books here in stock at Fables, and he is currently working on a multi-chapter book to come out. So we are excited to have you here, Steve. Welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your most recent work, Indiana Noble Sadman of the Year? What's it about? What can people expect when they pick it up?
Well, Indiana Noble Sadman of the Year is my 3rd book of poems. I was actually going through a real hard time at the time when I was writing those poems. At first I wasn't writing those poems, and I got an email from Joe Cheney at IUSB, and he said, if you have a manuscript that you can submit to our press, we'll consider it, like by the end of by the beginning of the next school year. And so that really got me writing. And I was at a point in my life where I'd kind of shut down on the poems. We had some family issues and some tragedies and so on, and I wasn't really putting much down. So that kickstarted me, and I ended up writing a lot of poems about teaching, and a few poems about teaching, and a lot of poems about my kids. And I always tend to write poems about social issues too. And then along the way on the process, we decided that we were going to take illustrations that my kids made anywhere between 4 and 10 years ago and use those as illustrations for the book.
Was there anything difficult to write for this particular set of poems?
I don't know. I guess I wrote poems about my kids and included a few of those in this book, and some poets kind of consider that a taboo. But I tried to be a little careful about how I talked about my kids. Didn't include anything that I thought would embarrass them or anything like that. And the poems about my kids, really, I hadn't done a lot of those in the other 2 books. They were a lot younger, and they were just getting to the age where we were talking a lot more, and they were kind of growing up, but they were still pretty young. And just what came out when I thought about what to write about them was pretty surprising sometimes.
What was the most difficult thing about this book to write?
The difficult book is the next one. I've got a book coming out. I've got a chapbook coming out from Main Street Rag Press, and I haven't even mentioned that on my social media yet, so you've got the scoop on that. But that particular book is called Guilty Prayer, and it deals with, among other things, my ex-wife's death by suicide in 2013. So this Sadman is a book that celebrates my kids and that has a sense of humor and that is sort of a little bit tender and that sort of thing, and also funny. And Guilty Prayer, which is the next one, which is tentatively set for spring 2021, was the one that I wrote. Actually, the one that I wrote right after this book came out, mostly, and that one was real difficult.
Going back to Indiana Noble Sadman of the Year, was there anything that you had to add out that you were particularly disappointed or sad about?
I don't know if I was sad that there were some things that were not included at the request of my editor, who was Joe Cheney at IUSB, that were probably better left out. Just some humor that's kind of lowbrow and that kind of thing. And
can you tell me about your other work, the other 2 books that you had out previous to Indiana Sadman?
This, by the way, put this up here, that's Indiana Noble Sadman of the Year, and that illustration on the cover is by my daughter, who is now an art school student at Heron. And again, that's got illustrations by my kids all the way through it. This is the one that came out before that. It's called And God Said, Let There Be Evolution. That's a drawing by a friend of mine. Oops, there's the dogs. It's a drawing by Pete Tura of Darwin touching the hand of Adam as if it's on the Sistine Chapel. And God Said, Let There Be Evolution was produced in 2011. I did all the wrong things as far as the management of it because I wanted to put it out real quick, and I put it out a year after my first book came out. And it sort of deals with faith, and it wrestles with the idea of God, and it wrestles with the Catholic faith, because as I was writing that book, I actually left the Catholic Church again, but it was for the last time at the time. And it has a lot of humor, and it's really sort of uncensored, the second book. And then the first one I put out, And God Said and this one, Unacknowledged Legislations, are from NYQ Books, which is the New York Quarterly's publishing wing. They just started doing these books when the editor up there offered to do this one. And Unacknowledged Legislations, that picture on the front is supposed to be me signing a bill into law, as if I'm the president or something, and I'm surrounded by people who are significant in my life and so on. And a lot of the poems in there were stand-up poems to a degree. I spent a lot of time reading at a local open mic and at various places, and really got in the habit of figuring out that people would shut up and listen to me if I made them laugh. So did poetry live in places where people didn't always get a lot of poetry, and that was a good experience because that sharpened me up and taught me how to get people's attention quick and that kind of thing.
That actually leads me to my next question, and that what led you to start writing?
I mean, I started writing for real when I was a freshman in high school, and I remember I was always sort of attracted to writing and way into reading and so on. And I when I was a freshman, I just decided I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to write poems. It's a weird thing for a 14, 15-year-old boy in Indiana to decide I'm going to write poems and I don't care what anybody thinks about it. But that's kind of what it came to then. And then throughout my career of writing, I've been writing since 1990. And there are periods where it kind of went by the wayside, but I kept coming back to it. And there's maybe a few examples where I almost quit altogether, but wrote something or had some sort of experience that brought me back to writing. And with Sad Man, it was Joe saying if I had something to submit, they would consider it. And right now, I feel like I'm not going to stop writing again. I'm working on a lot of stuff, and it doesn't feel like it's going to go away anymore.
You said that you started writing when you were 15 or 14. If you could give advice to someone who was also starting to write at that age, what would it be?
Oh, sometimes I do give advice because I teach high school English, so I run into kids who are writing poems, and I guess what would I give? I would encourage them to be honest. In their poems, because I think that's a hard thing to do. I was looking back through my first two books, and I realized how occasionally I would frame a story or frame a situation I was talking about in a certain way. And in those earlier books, sometimes make myself into a hero, maybe even when I wasn't a hero. But it's hard. I think it's hard for young writers to really see clearly. It's hard for any writer to see clearly and to write about their experience in a way that is genuine and not just not sort of self-aggrandizing. And that's what it took me a long time to learn that's part of the deal. And so probably if I could tell my 14 or 15-year-old self anything, I'd tell him to write honest work and to focus on trying to tell the truth.
Are there any books from childhood that helped shape you as a writer?
Childhood. I mean, I liked the Shel Silverstein books when I was real young, when I was in like second grade. Those I was really attracted to those. I remember in fifth grade or so, I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and my teacher got really snotty with me and told me I should be reading classics, which was kind of weird. But growing up, as I got into high school and so on, I read a lot of the Beats, Kerouac and Ginsberg, and William Burroughs and that kind of stuff. And reading has just been ongoing. I'm certainly much more versed in all kinds of poetry that's out there, current and from the past 50 years. Let's say over the last 5 or so years than I was before that. I've been reading quite a lot lately. So the influence never really stops. There's always stuff I'm looking at and kind of taking something from or learning something from.
Who is influencing you right now?
There's one, the poet Larry Levitt. He died in '94, but he's become sort of a bit of a cult figure, and he's just an absolutely brilliant poet. And I really like the way he uses pace and rhythm in his poems, and the way he kind of turns and melds from one scene into the next, and somehow manages to bring it all together. So I've done a little bit of writing where I try to take from that approach. Who else? Bob Hickok is the guy who I wrote all of And God Said, Let There Be Let There Be Evolution was written reading a lot of Bob Hickok. There's a, I don't know, there's a lot of people. Those are a couple. Mary Ruefle I really like. Heather Crystal I really like. Hanif Abdurraqib I do. There's a lot out there. There's a lot of contemporary ones. There's a lot of poets younger than me that I'm reading now, because I'm sort of getting into middle age, and the up and comers are, in their 20s.
What's the most difficult part of your artistic process?
Well, and then the more recent things I've been writing, I've been addressing some personal experience that's not easy to address, and that's probably the most difficult part. But it's also sort of empowering and freeing and cathartic to get work out there about that kind of stuff. In 2017, I got sober in January, so I've been alcohol free for 3.5 years about, and when that happened, when I got sober and I stopped drinking to kind of mask pain and to deal with various symptoms of maladies and so on, I started thinking about things that happened way in the past, including my ex's death by suicide, but also my own hospitalization in a psychiatric facility and my own attempt at suicide at the end of the 90s. And I began writing about that stuff in 2017, and I'd barely touched it at all in the 17 years between when it happened and when I finally decided to quit drinking and deal with it. And those things were not easy to write about, but I think it was very good to write about them. And I think the poems are honest, and they are not overly pious, right? There's some edge to them. And they feel real to me, and it's material that I hadn't gone into, so it felt like fresh stuff, even though some of it was things that happened as far as 17, 18 years ago or farther.
Tell us a bit about the writing process. Are there certain routines you go through, or do you just sit down when you're inspired?
I don't have a set routine as far as time of the day or anything like that. I teach high school and I grade papers a lot during the school year, and so I sit down whenever I can, and I catch sometimes longer stretches of time and sometimes shorter pieces of time to write out something or to read or to do a little bit of both, reading for my own purposes and not for school. And there's no, I don't know, a lot of the times I just get out a notebook and see what comes out. If I've got a first line, then I can just go from there. I used to get a lot more bigger ideas about what a poem would be doing or what the overall theme of the poem would be, and I've kind of gone away from that. It's a lot more improvisational for me now. And another thing I do sometimes is I read other poets or read poets who I like, and they kind of spur on creativity in me. I read Mary Ruefle, and I want to write something in response to Mary Ruefle, or I want to write something that sounds a little bit like Mary Ruefle, let's say. And I'm sorry about the dog, and I respond. And I do that with any poet who I'm reading who kind of trips my trigger and gets me into writing my own stuff as a sort of response is something that's worthwhile, especially worthwhile reading. I think there's a lot of those.
Do you have any support people, writing groups, or readers who read your work when you want critiques?
There's a local group, and most of the people in it are younger than I am, and a couple of them are former students of mine, but we have a group that meets in a church that my friend Nick and his girlfriend live in out here on South 15. And we have a writers group that meets once or twice a month, and most of us do poems, and one of the guys is a songwriter, and we all share a little bit and kind of comment. It's partly a critical group. I've gotten some good critical comments and some useful comments, and it's partly sort of a support group, I guess, where you just kind of encourage each other to keep working on your stuff. And
tell us a little bit more what we can expect with Guilty Prayer that's going to be coming out soon.
A 30-page chapbook. Most of the poems are on a single page. Some of the poems deal with Lydia's death by suicide. Some of the poems deal with our past marriage and our relationship, which got kind of messed up. Some of the poems deal with alcoholism and addiction. Some of them deal with psychiatric ward convalescence. And there's little bits of humor. There's some kind of edgy humor in some of the poems, and then a few of the poems are are kind of funny in a way that you wouldn't expect, but I had to have some stuff in there to lighten the mood a little bit. Too much of that heavy, this was a terrible experience stuff is not gonna grab people. And I guess also the poems in that book are different than anything I'd ever written up until that point. So there's some growth and there's some change in my approach to the poem in that book, and I'm proud of that. And that's gone on from that book into the other stuff I'm writing beyond that. I just keep changing and growing, I guess.
Is there anything else that you are working on or hoping to get out in the future?
I do have a full manuscript called Deep Cuts, and I've got that out to a few contests, and it's not been picked up in any contests or anything. It got close with a really big press that was kind of a dream press for me. They said it made it through several rounds of screening before they rejected it, so that was encouraging. And I think it's a good collection, and so I believe in it. It's going to take some time to find a place to find a home for that. And while that's going on, there's more stuff that I'm putting down, and I'm looking toward, I guess Deep Cuts would be book 5 if you count the chapbook. So I'm starting to look toward what book 6 will look like.
My final question for you is, if there's one thing that readers could walk away from, whether they're picking up any of your books, what would it be?
I guess it would be, don't take yourself too seriously, but don't take yourself too unseriously. I try to occupy that middle ground when I'm dealing with experiences and social issues and the various things that I talk about in my poems.
Well, thank you, Steve, for taking the time to talk with me. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing your new work and everything that comes out. So, again,
thanks for having me.